Hello and welcome to Deserve 2021. Thank you so much for joining us. We made it, you guys, in spite of a pandemic and several other disasters. Here we are back in December, making things happen. I want to congratulate you on persevering this far and joining us. So thank you so much. With us today, we have Dr. Marlon C. Johnson. Hello, Dr. Johnson.
Hey, how are you? It's good to see you.
Yes, it is. It's good to be seen, considering. If you would please go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell the people who you are.
Absolutely. So I am Dr. Marlon Johnson. I'm an assistant professor of counselor education at Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. I'm also the owner and lead counselor for my private practice, Johnson Counseling and Consulting, here in Austin, Texas. So doing a lot of things to support our community with mental health services, as well as small organizations and large organizations with diversity, equity, and inclusive strategies and practices. So I'm glad to be here and to be a part of this conversation.
I love that last little tidbit of your intro, because that was not a part of your intro last year.
It wasn't. Growth and change.
Come on. I love to hear it. Don't make me shout. Y'all know I'm saved and sanctified. I'm searching.
Come on.
I know that's not everybody's testimony, but that's mine. Oh God, I thank you. Yes, I do. This is real. I got to pause for a moment. That felt good for a moment. Yes, it did. I thank him. I'm so serious. When I heard you say, yes, God, come on now.
Well, I think our conversations last year really encouraged me and inspired me to, and reminded me that the things that we talk about, the things that we're encountering, during this conference, during this week, are conversations that need to continue to go on, not only during this time, our time together, but that it's evergreen. It's an ongoing conversation to continue our movement forward, to continue to destigmatize and normalize the experiences of people living in all different kinds of conditions. So I was honored and inspired to be a speaker last year, and honored to be back and to share a little bit more of the ways in which I've grown, and hopefully the ways in which we can grow together. So
I love it. Oh, I love it. So I have to do this, and please don't get mad at me, because I know we have an agenda full of questions. But what you just said to me has inspired me just to ask a quick question. It won't go too deep. Well, that'll be dependent upon you. I know we're supposed to be focusing on, because you and I do this World AIDS Day emphasis. I got it. But with you taking the time to branch out and start your own practice and to do that, can you talk about briefly, if you're comfortable doing so, because I know I'm throwing this at you, can you talk about briefly the some of the hurdles you had to face, like internally? Because there's tons of hurdles outwardly that we have to handle, the incorporation, LLC, all that kind of good stuff, registration, licensing, all of that. But the internal stuff that you had to deal with, can you hint at that a little bit?
Absolutely. So building a business, especially building a business in a pandemic, is just its own world of chaos and experience.
Yeah.
For me personally, my challenges were, there was so much to learn. And this was a year of us learning and growing and changing, encountering a world that we had never seen before. And I had only done trainings and counseling sessions in person. So there was a lot of psychological considerations for me to say, am I okay? Can I do this? Am I enough? Did the skills that I learned to do things in person translate to the experiences that I'm going to be having with individuals, with executive leadership over Zoom? And so I just had to continue to remind myself, as people were saying, like, hey, your voice is needed. Hey, I would love to have a counselor like you, to say that the virtual space was not going to be a barrier if I didn't allow it to be. So it was a lot of me taking extra time to do additional trainings, to consult with some of my colleagues who have been running their own private practices virtually, and to just be present with myself to say, you got this. Those were a lot of at least the personal strategies and experiences that I had to take on, so that when I hit that I was accepting new clients, or I was open to working with new organizations, that I was ready internally, and that I was settled in my own body to do that work.
Thank you. So before we move on, I'd like to just simply say to the entrepreneurs and to the creatives, to those small business owners, all of you, I just simply like to say, just as he said, take that time and do what you got to do to realize that your voice is needed. What you bring to the table is not just valid, but it is also needed. And so whether or not someone else is doing what you're doing, they're not going to be doing what you're doing. They can't bring to the table what you bring to the table because they don't bring you to the table. So I just want you guys to be encouraged to continue to, take those chances, take those leaps. You may not always land how you want to land. Get up, adjust, learn, figure it out, do it again. I promise you, it is worth it. So thank you so much for that. I had to ask you. I had to. But with that, let's move into this World AIDS emphasis. If you guys see me looking this way, it's because I'm sitting in the window seat of my bedroom. And my laptop is sitting beside me, just a little lower than me. And so that's where I'm looking. I'm looking to my laptop. So with that, we're going to kind of talk about two different topics here. One of them being mental health and mental health care as pertains to HIV testing, prevention, as well as care. But then also we'll be discussing the need for cultural competence. Cultural competence in the public health space as pertains to HIV prevention and care. So the first thing I want to ask you, as the mental health guru that you are, when it comes to trepidation and intimidation surrounding HIV testing, why do you think that that is a temporary method? And by that, I mean, or do you believe that that's a temporary method? And if so, why do you believe that? I asked the question because I see a lot of fear mongering and intimidation used in our methods for getting people to go get tested.
I see.
We do a lot
Yeah.
of fear creation.
Yes. So, the statistics around, the prevalence of HIV still, it's people aren't contracting HIV at the same rate as maybe it was occurring in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now we know more, right? We know about the mechanisms, we know about ways to test, and there are a lot more methods for treatment and care, but there's also the ongoing stigma now of, if there's still the continuation of, if you're getting tested, it means that you aren't, people might imagine that you aren't engaging in safe sexual practices, that you are not aware of the statuses of your partners. There may also be the idea of the reason that you're getting tested is, there's so much there that you're not doing all the things, or maybe it's economic, right? Like, oh, individuals who may not be able to afford PrEP are also regularly going to get tested because they can't afford it, right? Like, there are all these stereotypes or thoughts that come up. And so in order to encourage people to keep going, to keep getting tested, the idea is like, you don't want to be a statistic. You don't want to be the next one. We're doing our best to prevent the spread and outbreaks of HIV in a modern era. And these are all true things. The language, the tone in which we are encouraging individuals to normalize testing across race, gender, economic status, whether or not you're on PrEP or not, right? That intimidation just doesn't work, right? It's like when you're working with a child and you're telling them, you're trying to scare them away from doing something, scare them away from, touching a stove or playing with something, because if you go in that closet, that monster is going to come get you, right? Eventually the kid might test that theory and then realize, well, oh, there was no monster here in the first place, right? So yeah, intimidation, fear tactics, it doesn't work as well as just giving people information, as just telling them why it's important for you to continue to have regular testing, or to continue to know your status and be comfortable talking about that status when you're engaging in sex with partners. So yeah.
Yes, I would have to agree with you there. And you lead me right into that question, or into that my following question, when it comes to why information and safe conversation is a better method. Um, I when I look at how we do things now in public health and even in the private sector, trying to get people in for testing, it reminds me of the same way that many churches in the Bible Belt try to
Mm,
get people in to
mm.
worship, or try to get people in, to salvation. Not that I use the quotation marks correctly, but I just infer something else. That's a whole other, forgive me.
The next
Believe it or
conversation.
not. But it reminds
Yeah.
me of the same thing and how it just doesn't work. People come in, they stay for a while, and then they realize, oh, uh,
Yeah.
but I've noticed that when people come to learn of, um, to develop relationship, or to build their own deep, intimate knowledge when it comes to their religious beliefs and their faith walks and such, they tend to stick to those things, and be a bit more dedicated to said faith.
Yeah.
And it comes across a bit more genuine. And I believe that that same approach would work for testing if we were willing to have those honest conversations. What do
Yeah.
you think we need to do, though, um, to inspire that kind of conversation from the public health sphere, and from the public health sphere, and from medical practices, and from the private sector alike? How can we
Mm.
propagate that type of healthy conversation?
Well, it's important for us to remember, especially in spheres of public health, that when we are encouraging and engaging in communities that maybe we're starting to see particular health trends that are deleterious to that particular community, that are
Mhm,
harmful to that community,
mhm.
um, that one, we have to understand and recognize the culture of the community in which we're communicating.
Yes.
And two, we have to engage in messaging that is going to support the autonomy of the individuals in that community, that is going to encourage us to uh, not be coercive, right? So that intimidation, the trepidation, um, but that we really want people to own their decisions, right? So
Mhm,
learning pedagogy, right, is all about helping the individual to learn the information, to gather it, to then be able to use that in a way that's applicable to the ways in which that person is living, and to hopefully synthesize and make decisions that are right for them.
mm,
So it may make sense for me to get tested every 6 months based on the amount of contacts, sexual contacts that I'm having, the number of partners, right? My preventative methods. That may not be the method or the mechanism or the timeliness that another person may need
mhm,
with their timing. But if we give people information about when we might consider going in for a test, or what might be some things to look out for, or what might be some concerns or thoughts that are coming up, how to manage the anxiety around HIV and living with HIV prior to a diagnosis. These are things that might help inform us about, okay, so I might need to go and get tested, or I might need to engage in with these particular persons about my sexual practices and how to continue to do the things that help me feel good, help me feel safe and connected to other people, and help me to live authentically as I am with whatever my practices are. So really, it's about public health officials coming together and supporting people to live authentically, to speak openly, to talk within the context that they're living, and to help them to do things that are going to help them to maintain those healthy lives that we're hoping is the outcome. I hope that didn't sound like I was talking in too many circles, but I hope it makes
No, I really feel like that answered the question. And it takes us right on into because you mentioned even prior to a positive diagnosis. And so I want to move beyond that portion into the positive diagnosis, because part of the reason why we have people going to get tested is so that we can get early detection. We want to find out earlier, sooner than later, that you're positive, so we can get you into care, get you taken care of, and things of that nature. Why do you believe, and because I believe that is very important, but I just want to find out why you believe the gap between positive testing and entry to care is so crucial?
Yeah. So there are a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings and anxieties that go into walking into that room and not knowing your status. One of the best portrayals of it, I think, were on several seasons of the TV show Pose, of just sitting in that very stark white hallway and just seeing people's knees bounce up and down, waiting to hear those words. Those anxieties are real. And, you know, a lot of us never really imagine the moment that we might hear or have someone talk about our seroconversion. But it happens, right? And it can be really jarring for many of us who have heard these horror stories, especially in Black and Brown communities, where we're constantly told before we even come out of or let people into our identities. And this is assuming talking specifically to my queer and trans siblings, that, you know, there's a lot of stigma about, you know, you're going to catch AIDS and you're going to die. You're going to, you know, and again, like using that language that is completely false, completely incorrect.
Right.
But we hear that language early.
Yeah.
And so anybody of any identity going into testing is automatically can be coming in with that anxiety of the narratives, right? And so I believe that being able to connect to a mental health provider earlier, maybe even as someone is going testing. Honestly, if it were me running an ideal clinic, individuals would concurrently have opportunities to speak with a mental health provider or a mental health facilitator to just check in with someone as they're getting tested. One of the best moments that I had in getting tested at a community agency was at every step, from check-in to the waiting room, to even the person that was pricking my finger, was them just kind of checking in with me. How are you doing today? How was the last time, or when was the last time that you got tested? Just curious, you know, how are you feeling about what might you imagine your outcome being? Do you have other people who you might be able to talk to about whatever your status might be following this test, right? All before my finger even got pricked for a rapid test. And I felt so safe and so certain that I would be connected to services if anything were to go in a direction that I wasn't sure would go. And so I just recognized that my anxiety was lowered significantly, even though I was very certain of my status and was confirmed following that test, right? Had it not gone a way that I was certain, I knew that that organization at every step of the way was ready to support me in finding someone and me having a conversation. Even if I was to start weeping in that office, I was certain that someone would offer a warm trade-off to me going to another office, to having a moment to gather my thoughts, to connect me to some services, to help me to make some conversations or contacts with a trusted individual. That stuff is so important. I'm with you. I believe that that helps us to make um, really strong decisions on what our lives might be like now as an individual starts living with HIV.
Thank you. Thank you. So yes, to those public health workers and to those community agency workers, I know that many of you are already doing this. I would greatly consider, um, you know, placing a really huge importance on that time gap, on that period of time between the positive diagnosis and the entry into care. I've noticed so often where people are positively diagnosed, and then there's a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before they're actually entered into care. And we've got to figure out a way to reduce that time frame because, as you're saying, that time is so crucial. It's the internal struggle that goes on there, the mental struggle that goes on there is just so great. And I'm so glad you pointed out the need for mental health care during that time as well, making sure that we've got the professionals and the licensed individuals on staff and available at their disposal to make those things happen. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
And everyone on the staff, right? Everyone has,
Right.
I would encourage everyone at testing facilities, at public health institutions to at least have that minimal amount of crisis management training. Because
Yes,
it's a crisis, right? Like
it
it can
really is a
very
great.
much, it can be a crisis.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's such a great note. Um, And so, staying in that mental health care vein, what role do you believe that it plays when it comes to retention once we get them into care?
Mhm.
Why is mental health care important?
Yeah. So as a licensed professional counselor myself, I recognize that my role is not to give advice to my clients, to tell them this is what you do next, this is da 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 da. But it's the gentle standing alongside that person to help them when they do feel really low or they do feel really frustrated with themselves or with systems of systemic barriers that stop them from getting treatment immediately, to help that person process that out, to talk through what's going on in their world. Um, mental health care providers are that soft space to land, or that individual that gives that hard reality of you haven't been to your appointment in 3 weeks.
Hmm.
What do you anticipate is going to happen the next time you walk into the doctor's office? Really having some of those reality testing moments as well, and helping them even play out what's going on within them, um, so that when they come back to that moment or they see the appointment on their calendar, or they need to make that next phone call, they've already done some of that work to imagine or to work through what that situation or scenario could be, or to at least have the awareness of what might be preventing that person from care. And mental health care providers, I'm thinking counselors and social workers specifically, are trained to engage in a counselor, scholar, advocate model. So at least the students that I train
Hmm.
know all of this
Hmm.
stuff. And so it's important for them to recognize that sometimes it is our work as well to make sure that our clients are getting the care that they need, to walk alongside them, go and make that call to the office and say, my client hasn't been able to get the care or make the appointment. What's going on?
Yeah, yeah,
What do we need to do to speed this up? And I think
yeah.
just again, having a partnership inside of this process as you're learning what strategies are necessary for you to maintain care. I think just mental health care professionals help to be in alliance and accompliceship with clients as they're going through the early and the later stages. Because people who have been living with HIV for 15, 20 years, also still might want support, need support. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, because the game changes. The game
It
has
does.
changed since 1995.
And the
And
aging is totally different now.
oh my gosh, right? So, I can be long-winded, but yeah, the alliance and accompliceship, I think, is really helpful.
Thank you. I really do appreciate that. We're going to take a brief break and then we're going to come back for this next portion of our conversation regarding cultural competence in public health spaces. Okay. So give us a moment and we'll be right back with you guys.